You're sitting at a lavishly decorated table in the court of Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, surrounded by the most powerful nobles in all of France. Crystal goblets catch the flickering candlelight, casting dancing shadows across plates of the finest porcelain. The aroma of exotic spices fills the air as servants in silk livery present course after course of what appears to be the most exquisite cuisine money can buy. You raise a delicate morsel to your lips, savoring what you believe to be the finest delicacy from the royal kitchens. But what if I told you that the tender meat you're consuming isn't venison or pheasant or any beast of the field? What if the secret ingredient in that royal feast was something far more horrifying? Something that would make your blood run cold and your stomach turn? What if you discovered that European royalty had been practicing the most taboo act imaginable, consuming human flesh not out of desperation or madness, but as a calculated display of power, medicine, and ultimate dominance? This isn't some gothic fairy tale or medieval legend whispered around dying fires. This is documented history, carefully hidden away in palace archives and medical texts, sanitized from the stories we tell about the golden ages of European civilization. Behind the glittering facades of Versailles and beneath the marble floors of royal palaces from Madrid to Vienna, a dark secret festered for centuries. Kings and queens, princes and princesses, the most refined and cultured individuals in human history were engaging in acts of cannibalism that would make the most primitive tribes seem civilized by comparison. Before diving into these forbidden stories of royal appetites, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these dark chapters together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with the secrets that power tries to bury. The practice of royal cannibalism wasn't born from hunger or survival. It emerged from something far more sinister, a twisted philosophy that viewed human consumption as the ultimate expression of divine right and absolute power. European monarchs didn't just rule over their subjects' lives and deaths. They believed they had the right to consume their very essence, to literally incorporate their subjects into their own royal bodies. This macabre tradition began in the shadows of medieval courts, where alchemists and court physicians convinced kings and queens that consuming human flesh and blood could transfer the strength, youth, and vitality of their subjects directly into their own bodies. It was the ultimate form of taxation, levied not in gold or grain but in human flesh. The practice spread like a plague through the interconnected royal houses of Europe, passed down through bloodlines already tainted by centuries of inbreeding and madness. Picture the scene in a castle's hidden chambers, far from the public halls where courtiers bowed and scraped before their sovereign. Here, in rooms that appeared on no architectural plans, royal physicians prepared their most secret remedies. The air would be thick with incense designed to mask other odors, while braziers burned hot enough to reduce bones to powder. These weren't torture chambers, though the distinction became meaningless for those who provided the raw materials. These were royal kitchens of a different sort, where human bodies were butchered and prepared with the same care given to preparing a feast for foreign ambassadors. The victims weren't random peasants snatched from village streets, though plenty of those disappeared into royal appetites as well. The most prized flesh came from specific sources, chosen for the qualities their consumers hoped to absorb. Young virgins were believed to carry pure essence that could restore youth to aging monarchs. Warriors who had died in battle were consumed to transfer their courage and strength. Scholars and philosophers were devoured to absorb their wisdom and intelligence. Beautiful courtiers found their attractiveness literally consumed by queens, desperate to maintain their fading looks. What makes this practice even more disturbing is how systematically it was organized. Royal courts maintained entire networks of suppliers, procurers who could acquire the necessary human materials without drawing unwanted attention. These weren't crude butchers working in dark alleys. They were sophisticated operations that could identify, acquire, and process human flesh with industrial efficiency. Bodies were sourced from hospitals, prisons, battlefields, and even orphanages. Any institution where people died regularly and their absence wouldn't be immediately noticed became a potential supplier for royal appetites. The medical justification for these practices was provided by court physicians who had studied ancient texts and developed elaborate theories about the transfer of human essence through consumption. They created detailed treatises on which parts of the human body contained the most potent properties, how different preparation methods could enhance or diminish these effects, and which combinations of human flesh could create the most beneficial outcomes for their royal patients. These weren't ignorant savages acting on primitive superstitions. These were some of the most educated individuals of their time, graduates of the finest universities in Europe, men who had studied anatomy, chemistry, and natural philosophy. Yet they convinced themselves and their royal patrons that eating human flesh was not only acceptable but medically necessary for maintaining royal health and vitality. The preparation methods were as sophisticated as they were horrifying. Human flesh wasn't simply roasted over open fires like some primitive ritual. Royal kitchens developed elaborate recipes that could disguise the taste and texture of human meat, incorporating exotic spices and preparation techniques that made the forbidden flesh indistinguishable from conventional delicacies. Some royal cooks became renowned throughout European courts for their ability to transform human ingredients into seemingly normal dishes that even experienced courtiers couldn't identify. The preservation techniques were equally advanced. Royal courts needed to maintain steady supplies of human flesh, but bodies decompose quickly under normal conditions. Court alchemists developed methods for preserving human meat that could keep it fresh for weeks or even months. They created specialized salts, oils, and other chemical preservatives that could maintain the supposed medicinal properties of human flesh while preventing the decay that would make consumption dangerous. But the technical sophistication of royal cannibalism extended beyond simple preservation and preparation. European courts developed elaborate classification systems for different types of human flesh, categorizing victims by age, gender, social status, and cause of death. These classifications determined not just the supposed medicinal value of the flesh, but also its appropriate use in royal consumption. Young children were reserved for certain ailments, while elderly victims were thought suitable for different conditions. The most disturbing aspect of this classification system was its clinical detachment. Royal physicians maintained detailed records that read like medical textbooks, documenting the effects of consuming flesh from different categories of victims. These records, hidden away in palace archives for centuries, reveal the systematic nature of royal cannibalism. This wasn't occasional madness or isolated incidents of depravity. It was institutionalized consumption of human flesh, practiced regularly and methodically by some of the most powerful individuals in European history. The procurement networks that supplied these royal appetites operated with remarkable efficiency and discretion. They had to, because even in an age when royal power was considered absolute, certain practices couldn't be conducted openly. The suppliers developed elaborate systems of codes and signals that allowed them to communicate about their gruesome trade without explicitly discussing human flesh. They created false documentation that could explain the movement of bodies, and they established relationships with officials who could overlook suspicious activities in exchange for generous compensation. These networks weren't limited to individual courts. As royal cannibalism spread throughout European nobility, suppliers began operating across national boundaries, creating international markets for human flesh. A particularly desirable victim might be acquired in one kingdom and transported hundreds of miles to satisfy the appetite of a monarch in another realm. The logistics of this trade required sophisticated planning and execution that rivaled legitimate commercial enterprises. The transportation methods were especially ingenious, designed to move human flesh across long distances without detection while maintaining its supposed medicinal properties. Specialized containers were developed that could preserve bodies during extended journeys, while false documentation portrayed these shipments as containing exotic spices, rare medicines, or other valuable commodities that would justify the expense and secrecy surrounding their transport. Royal courts also established testing procedures to verify the quality and authenticity of their human supplies. Court physicians developed methods for assessing the freshness, purity, and supposed potency of human flesh before it was served to royal consumers. These assessments weren't based on modern scientific understanding, but they reflected genuine attempts to ensure that royal cannibalism achieved its intended effects. The most sought-after human flesh came with detailed provenance, documentation that traced the victim's life and death to verify the qualities that royal consumers hoped to absorb. A warrior's flesh might come with battlefield reports detailing his courage under fire. A scholar's remains might include academic records proving his intellectual achievements. Beautiful courtiers might be accompanied by portraits and testimonials to their physical perfection. This documentation served multiple purposes beyond simple quality assurance. It allowed royal consumers to believe they were absorbing specific qualities from their victims, creating psychological effects that reinforced their faith in cannibalistic medicine. It also provided entertainment during royal feasts, as monarchs could regale their dinner companions with stories about the lives of those they were consuming. The psychological impact on royal consumers was profound and complex. Many genuinely believed they could feel the effects of their cannibalistic consumption, reporting increased strength, improved health, and enhanced mental abilities after consuming human flesh. Whether these effects were real or imaginary mattered less than the confidence they gave to royal practitioners, encouraging them to continue and expand their forbidden appetites. But the psychological effects weren't limited to imagined benefits. The act of consuming human flesh fundamentally changed how these monarchs viewed their subjects and their own power. When you've literally eaten another human being, the psychological barriers between self and other begin to dissolve in disturbing ways. Royal cannibals began to see their subjects not as people with inherent worth, but as potential sources of nourishment and enhancement. This dehumanization affected every aspect of their rule, making them capable of cruelties that even other absolute monarchs found excessive. The ritual aspects of royal cannibalism were as elaborate as any religious ceremony, because in many ways, that's exactly what they were. European courts developed intricate protocols for the consumption of human flesh, complete with special vessels, ceremonial knives, and prescribed prayers or incantations. These rituals served multiple functions, transforming what might otherwise be seen as mere barbarism into something that felt sacred and meaningful to the participants. The timing of these cannibalistic feasts was carefully planned to coincide with significant events in the royal calendar. Coronations, royal weddings, military victories, and even birthdays became occasions for special human consumption. The flesh consumed during these events was selected specifically for its symbolic relevance to the occasion. A coronation might feature the flesh of a deposed rival, while a royal wedding could include victims chosen for their beauty or fertility. The vessels used for royal cannibalism were works of art in themselves, crafted by the finest artisans, and often passed down through generations like family heirlooms. Golden chalices designed to hold human blood, silver plates crafted specifically for serving human flesh, and ornate knives blessed by court chaplains for the purpose of carving their forbidden meals. These implements were kept in special chambers, maintained by trusted servants who were sworn to absolute secrecy about their true purpose. The preparation of human flesh for royal consumption became an art form that rivaled any culinary tradition. Master chefs who specialized in this forbidden cuisine developed techniques that could transform even the most challenging human ingredients into palatable dishes. They learned to age human flesh like fine wine, to blend different victims together for complex flavors, and to present their creations with the same elegance expected at any royal banquet. These culinary masters weren't working in isolation. They collaborated with court physicians to ensure their preparations would maximize the supposed medicinal benefits of human consumption. They consulted with alchemists about which spices and preparations could enhance the transfer of human essence. They worked with artists to create presentations that were visually stunning, transforming acts of cannibalism into aesthetic experiences that appealed to refined royal sensibilities. The secrecy surrounding royal cannibalism required elaborate security measures that extended far beyond simple discretion. Royal courts developed entire intelligence networks dedicated to protecting the secret of their forbidden practices. These networks monitored potential threats, eliminated witnesses who might expose the truth, and spread misinformation designed to discredit any rumors that might emerge about royal cannibalism. The servants who participated in these practices were carefully selected for their loyalty, their dependence on royal favor, and their inability to find protection elsewhere if they were to betray their master's secrets. Many were foreign-born individuals with no local connections, making them completely dependent on royal protection. Others were criminals who had been spared execution in exchange for their service, creating bonds of obligation that made betrayal extremely costly. But even the most loyal servants represented potential security risks, and royal courts developed harsh methods for ensuring their continued silence. Servants who showed any signs of wavering loyalty might find themselves becoming ingredients rather than preparers of royal feasts. This created an atmosphere of terror among palace staff that extended far beyond those directly involved in cannibalistic practices, as everyone understood that knowledge of royal secrets could be as dangerous as ignorance. The international implications of royal cannibalism created complex diplomatic challenges that required careful management. When multiple European courts were practicing human consumption, diplomatic visits became exercises in mutual deception and careful observation. Royal guests had to be fed without revealing their hosts' cannibalistic practices, while hosts had to resist the temptation to share their most prized delicacies with visiting dignitaries who might not appreciate the honor being bestowed upon them. Marriage negotiations between royal houses practicing cannibalism involved discussions that went far beyond traditional concerns about dowries and political alliances. Prospective spouses needed to be gradually introduced to their future partner's dietary preferences, a process that required delicate timing and careful psychological preparation. Some royal marriages were delayed for months or even years while courts determined whether proposed spouses could be trusted with such dangerous secrets. The religious implications of royal cannibalism created theological crises that required creative solutions from court chaplains and religious advisors. Christian doctrine clearly prohibited the consumption of human flesh, but royal practitioners needed religious justification for their forbidden appetites. Court theologians developed elaborate arguments that portrayed royal cannibalism as divinely sanctioned, drawing on obscure biblical passages and ancient religious traditions to create theological frameworks that could accommodate their patrons' practices. These religious justifications weren't merely academic exercises. They were essential for maintaining the psychological health of royal practitioners who genuinely believed in Christian teaching but felt compelled to continue their cannibalistic consumption. Court chaplains provided not just intellectual arguments but also spiritual counseling designed to help royal cannibals reconcile their practices with their religious beliefs. The economic impact of royal cannibalism extended far beyond the direct costs of acquiring and preparing human flesh. The secrecy required to maintain these practices necessitated extensive bribery networks that corrupted officials throughout the kingdom. The security measures needed to protect royal secrets required maintaining private armies of enforcers who operated outside normal legal structures. The procurement networks demanded ongoing investments in transportation, storage, and personnel that represented significant drains on royal treasuries. Yet royal courts continued these practices despite their enormous costs because they believed the benefits justified any expense. The supposed enhancement of royal health, strength, and wisdom was considered priceless, worth any amount of gold or effort required to obtain it. The psychological satisfaction of absolute dominance over their subjects was seen as essential to maintaining royal authority and divine right. The medical theories supporting royal cannibalism evolved throughout the centuries, adapting to new discoveries in anatomy and natural philosophy, while maintaining their core premise that human consumption could transfer desirable qualities between individuals. Court physicians incorporated elements of emerging scientific understanding into their cannibalistic practices, creating hybrid medical approaches that blended primitive superstition with cutting-edge research. These evolving medical theories led to increasingly sophisticated approaches to royal cannibalism that went far beyond simple consumption of human flesh. Court physicians began experimenting with different preparation methods designed to concentrate and purify the supposed beneficial properties of their human ingredients. They developed techniques for extracting essences from human organs, creating concentrated potions that could deliver the presumed benefits of cannibalism without requiring the consumption of actual flesh. The specialization within royal cannibalistic medicine became remarkably detailed, with different physicians focusing on specific aspects of human consumption. Some specialized in the procurement and evaluation of victims, developing expertise in identifying individuals whose consumption would provide maximum benefit to their royal patients. Others focused on preparation techniques, perfecting methods for transforming human flesh into palatable and supposedly beneficial forms. Still others became experts in timing and dosage, determining when and how much human flesh should be consumed to achieve desired effects without causing adverse reactions. This medical specialization created entire departments within royal courts dedicated exclusively to cannibalistic practices, employing dozens of professionals whose careers were built entirely on the consumption of human beings. The documentation systems developed to support royal cannibalism were as meticulous as any modern medical records. Court physicians maintained detailed journals tracking which victims were consumed, what effects were observed, and how different preparation methods influenced outcomes. These records allowed for systematic refinement of cannibalistic practices, turning what might have been random acts of consumption into carefully calibrated medical procedures. The record-keeping extended beyond simple medical observations to include detailed inventories of available human materials, schedules for consumption, and evaluations of supplier reliability. Royal courts maintained libraries of cannibalistic knowledge that rivaled the finest medical schools of their time, complete with illustrated texts showing proper butchering techniques and anatomical guides identifying which body parts contained the most desirable properties. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of these documentation systems was their clinical detachment. The records read like veterinary manuals discussing human beings with the same emotional distance typically reserved for livestock. Victims were reduced to their component parts, evaluated purely for their utility in enhancing royal health and power. This systematic dehumanization allowed royal practitioners to maintain their sense of moral superiority while engaging in acts that would horrify even hardened criminals. The training programs developed for servants involved in royal cannibalism were as comprehensive as any professional education. New staff members underwent months of preparation before being trusted with even minor roles in cannibalistic practices. They learned not just technical skills like proper butchering techniques and preservation methods, but also psychological conditioning designed to help them cope with the moral implications of their work. These training programs included elaborate initiation rituals designed to bind new servants to their roles through shared complicity. New staff members were required to participate directly in cannibalistic preparation, making them accomplices whose silence was guaranteed by their own culpability. The rituals also served to normalize what would otherwise be seen as horrifying practices, transforming acts of cannibalism into routine professional duties. The psychological conditioning extended beyond a simple acceptance of cannibalistic practices to include positive reinforcement for participation. Servants who demonstrated enthusiasm for their roles received promotions, better quarters, and increased privileges within the palace hierarchy. This created competitive environments where staff members vied for opportunities to prove their dedication to their master's forbidden appetites. The quality control measures implemented by royal courts were as rigorous as any modern manufacturing process. Every aspect of human procurement, preparation, and consumption was subject to multiple inspections and approvals. Bodies were examined by teams of physicians before being accepted for royal use. Preparation techniques were monitored by supervisors who had spent years perfecting their craft. Even the final presentation of cannibalistic meals was subject to aesthetic evaluation by courtiers trained in the visual arts. These quality control systems weren't just about ensuring palatability or safety. They were designed to maintain the psychological effectiveness of cannibalistic practices by ensuring that royal consumers could have complete confidence in what they were consuming. Any doubt about the quality or authenticity of human flesh could undermine the supposed medical benefits that justified these practices in the first place. The international trade networks that developed around royal cannibalism created diplomatic relationships that existed entirely outside normal channels of communication between kingdoms. Royal courts established secret alliances based purely on their shared cannibalistic practices, creating bonds that sometimes prove stronger than traditional political or military partnerships. These relationships allowed for the exchange of specialized knowledge about human consumption techniques and the sharing of particularly desirable victims between allied courts. The diplomatic protocols governing these secret relationships were as complex as any official treaty negotiations. Royal courts had to balance their desire for cannibalistic cooperation with the need to maintain absolute secrecy about their practices. This required developing communication methods that could convey detailed information about human procurement and consumption without creating written evidence that could be discovered by hostile parties. The courier networks established to support these diplomatic relationships operated with security measures that exceeded those used for state secrets. Messages were encoded using systems known only to the highest-ranking officials involved in cannibalistic practices. Couriers were selected for their absolute loyalty and their inability to survive if they betrayed their missions. The routes used for these communications changed regularly to prevent interception by parties who might expose the truth about royal cannibalism. The seasonal variations in royal cannibalistic practices reflected both practical considerations and symbolic beliefs about the timing of human consumption. Winter months saw increased activity as preservation techniques were more effective in cold weather, allowing courts to stockpile human flesh for use throughout the year. Spring consumption was often timed to coincide with renewal festivals, as royal practitioners believed fresh human essence could enhance their own rejuvenation after long winters. Summer practices focused on victims whose consumption was believed to provide protection against disease and weakness during the hottest months of the year. Autumn cannibalism was often associated with harvest celebrations, as royal courts symbolically harvested human essence along with agricultural products. These seasonal patterns created predictable demands that suppliers learned to anticipate, adjusting their procurement activities to meet the varying needs of their royal customers. The architectural modifications required to support royal cannibalistic practices left subtle but permanent marks on European palaces that remain visible to this day. Hidden chambers were constructed with specialized ventilation systems designed to manage the odors associated with human butchering and preparation. Secret passages connected these chambers to kitchens and dining rooms, allowing for the discreet transport of cannibalistic materials without detection by unwitting courtiers or visitors. The drainage systems in these hidden chambers were engineered to handle the waste products of human processing, connecting to sewer networks that could carry away evidence without contaminating water supplies used by the general palace population. Special storage facilities were built with cooling systems that could preserve human flesh for extended periods, using techniques that wouldn't be matched by conventional food preservation for centuries. The furniture and equipment designed specifically for cannibalistic practices represented some of the finest craftsmanship of their era, despite their gruesome purpose. Butchering tables were carved from single pieces of marble, designed to be both functional and beautiful enough to satisfy royal aesthetic standards. Storage containers were works of art, decorated with precious metals and gems while being engineered to maintain optimal preservation conditions for their contents. The psychological impact of royal cannibalism on the broader palace population was carefully managed through a combination of compartmentalization and misdirection. Most courtiers and servants never learned the full extent of their master's practices, but they couldn't help but notice the strange odors, the mysterious deliveries, and the occasional disappearances that accompanied cannibalistic activities. Royal courts developed elaborate explanations for these phenomena, creating alternative narratives that could satisfy curiosity without revealing dangerous truths. The compartmentalization systems ensured that even servants directly involved in cannibalistic practices knew only what was necessary for their specific roles. Butchers didn't interact with procurement specialists. Cooks weren't informed about preservation techniques. Storage managers had no contact with consumption ceremonies. This division of labor made it virtually impossible for any individual to fully understand the scope of their master's cannibalistic practices, while also making it difficult for potential whistleblowers to provide comprehensive evidence of royal crimes. The misdirection campaigns were equally sophisticated, spreading false rumors and alternative explanations that could account for the observable evidence of cannibalistic activities without revealing their true nature. Stories about exotic medical treatments, secret diplomatic missions, and religious ceremonies provided plausible cover for the suspicious activities that inevitably accompanied human consumption. These false narratives were carefully crafted to be more believable than the truth, making it easier for people to accept comfortable lies rather than confront horrifying realities. The legacy systems developed by royal courts practicing cannibalism ensured that their forbidden knowledge would be preserved for future generations, even if political circumstances made it temporarily impossible to continue active human consumption. Detailed manuals were created documenting every aspect of cannibalistic practices, from victim selection through final consumption. These manuals were hidden in secret libraries, protected by elaborate security measures and coded in languages known only to trusted successors. The succession planning for cannibalistic knowledge was as carefully managed as any other aspect of royal inheritance. Designated heirs were gradually introduced to their families' forbidden practices, undergoing extended training periods designed to ensure they could continue the traditions with appropriate skill and discretion. This educational process often began in childhood, with young royals being exposed to increasingly explicit aspects of cannibalistic practices as they matured and demonstrated their trustworthiness. The backup systems established to preserve cannibalistic knowledge included multiple copies of essential documents stored in different locations, trusted allies who could reconstruct key information if primary records were destroyed, and coded messages embedded in seemingly innocent artwork and literature that could preserve crucial details for future generations. These redundant preservation methods ensured that even catastrophic events couldn't completely eliminate the accumulated wisdom of centuries of royal cannibalism. The evolution of royal cannibalistic practices accelerated during periods of political instability, as desperate monarchs sought increasingly powerful methods for maintaining their authority and physical vitality. Wars, plagues, and succession crises created both increased demand for the supposed benefits of human consumption and greater opportunities for acquiring victims whose disappearances wouldn't be investigated. These crisis periods saw innovations in cannibalistic techniques that pushed the boundaries of what even experienced practitioners considered acceptable. The wartime applications of royal cannibalism took on particularly sinister dimensions, as monarchs sought to absorb the strength and courage of their enemies through direct consumption. Battlefield commanders were instructed to preserve the bodies of particularly valorous opponents for transport to royal kitchens. Captured enemy leaders faced fates worse than simple execution, as their consumption became symbolic acts of dominance that were believed to transfer their leadership abilities to their captors. The plague years created unprecedented opportunities for cannibalistic procurement, as mass deaths provided cover for the acquisition of victims whose absence wouldn't be noticed amid the general mortality. Royal courts established relationships with plague hospitals and burial grounds, ensuring steady supplies of human flesh while maintaining the appearance of charitable support for public health efforts. The medical chaos of plague periods also provided perfect cover for the transportation and storage activities required to support large-scale cannibalistic operations. The succession crises that periodically swept through European courts created particularly desperate circumstances that drove royal cannibalism to new extremes. When legitimacy hung in the balance and rival claimants threatened to establish dynasties, monarchs turned to ever more elaborate forms of human consumption in their quest for supernatural advantage. These periods saw the emergence of cannibalistic practices so extreme that even veteran practitioners found themselves shocked by the innovations their desperation produced. During the War of Spanish Succession, for instance, competing claimants to the throne engaged in what can only be described as cannibalistic arms races, each side attempting to outdo their rivals in the potency and audacity of their human consumption. Royal courts began targeting not just random victims, but the actual family members and supporters of their enemies, believing that consuming the flesh of their opponents' loved ones would transfer loyalty and inside knowledge directly to their own cause. The techniques developed during these crisis periods pushed the boundaries of what the human mind could rationalize as acceptable behavior. Royal physicians began experimenting with live consumption, arguing that the life force could only be properly transferred if the victim was still breathing when consumption began. These practices required specially designed chambers where screams couldn't be heard, and restraint systems that could hold struggling victims while they were systematically consumed over periods that could last for days. The psychological preparation required for these extreme practices involved conditioning programs that systematically desensitized royal participants to human suffering. Future monarchs were exposed to increasingly graphic displays of violence and consumption from early ages, their natural empathy methodically eroded through carefully orchestrated experiences designed to make them capable of the cruelties their positions would require. By the time they assumed full power, these individuals had been transformed into something barely recognizable as human, capable of ordering and participating in acts that would have horrified their younger selves. The religious ceremonies that accompanied these extreme cannibalistic practices became elaborate theatrical productions that could last for days, involving dozens of participants and requiring extensive choreography to coordinate the various elements of consumption, torture, and symbolic domination. These weren't simple meals, but complex rituals that combined elements of religious service, political theater, and sadistic entertainment into experiences that participants described as transcendent, though observers might use very different terminology. The international dimensions of competitive royal cannibalism created diplomatic situations so bizarre that they defied conventional understanding. Secret negotiations between royal courts began, including provisions for the exchange of particularly valuable victims, creating markets where human beings were traded like rare commodities based on their supposed enhancement properties. Royal marriages were sometimes arranged specifically to gain access to new sources of human flesh, with dowries including not just gold and territory, but also procurement networks and cannibalistic expertise. The documentation from these extreme periods reveals the complete moral collapse that occurred when absolute power combined with systematic dehumanization and desperate circumstances. Royal courts began maintaining detailed catalogs of their subjects, evaluating entire populations for their potential value as cannibalistic resources. Citizens were classified not just by their social status or economic productivity, but by their supposed enhancement properties, creating parallel systems of human valuation that existed entirely outside normal legal and social frameworks. The procurement networks that developed to support these expanded cannibalistic practices achieved levels of sophistication that rivaled legitimate commercial enterprises. They established intelligence operations that could identify and track particularly valuable potential victims across multiple kingdoms, creating databases of information that included not just basic biographical details, but also assessments of physical condition, psychological state, and estimated enhancement value. These networks employed professional evaluators who could assess human merchandise with the same expertise that others brought to appraising livestock or precious metals. The transportation systems developed to move human resources between courts created infrastructure that remained hidden but functional for centuries. Secret roads were constructed that bypassed normal travel routes, allowing for the discreet movement of victims and processed human materials without detection by local authorities or rival procurement networks. Way stations were established at regular intervals along these routes, providing secure storage facilities and processing capabilities that could maintain the quality of human merchandise during extended journeys. The competitive pressures of royal cannibalism led to innovations in human breeding programs that represented perhaps the most disturbing evolution of these practices. Royal courts began maintaining human livestock, populations of individuals bred specifically for consumption, raised under conditions designed to optimize their value as cannibalistic resources. These breeding programs applied the same selective techniques used for improving agricultural animals, but with human subjects who were treated as nothing more than mobile sources of enhancement properties. The genetic engineering aspects of these breeding programs involved careful selection for traits believed to enhance the cannibalistic value of offspring. Physical beauty was prioritized for its supposed ability to transfer attractiveness to consumers. Intelligence was cultivated to provide wisdom-enhancing properties. Strength and courage were bred to create victims whose consumption could transfer these martial qualities to royal cannibals seeking military advantage. The psychological conditioning of these human livestock began before birth, with pregnant mothers subjected to treatments designed to influence the development of their unborn children. Specific diets, environmental conditions, and even musical programs were implemented to create optimal conditions for producing valuable cannibalistic resources. The children born into these programs never knew normal human existence, being raised from birth to accept their ultimate destiny as food for their royal owners. The educational systems developed for human livestock were designed to maximize their value as cannibalistic resources, while minimizing their potential for resistance or escape. These individuals received training in areas believed to enhance their consumption value. Warriors were trained in combat techniques that would make their courage more potent. Scholars were educated in subjects that would make their wisdom more valuable. Artists were taught skills that would make their creativity more transferable to those who consumed them. The facilities designed to house human livestock represented architectural achievements that combined functional efficiency with the aesthetic standards expected in royal environments. These weren't crude prison camps, but sophisticated residential complexes designed to maintain their inhabitants in optimal condition while preventing escape or rebellion. The buildings included recreational facilities, educational spaces, and even entertainment venues, creating environments that could maintain the physical and mental health of human resources while preparing them for their ultimate purpose. The quality control measures applied to human livestock exceeded those used for any other royal resources. Individual subjects were monitored constantly for signs of disease, psychological deterioration, or other conditions that might reduce their cannibalistic value. Medical care was provided to maintain optimal health, but this care was focused entirely on preservation of consumption value rather than human welfare. Subjects showing signs of reduced value might be processed immediately rather than allowed to deteriorate further. The harvesting procedures developed for human livestock were designed to maximize both the quantity and quality of usable materials, while maintaining the operational efficiency required for large-scale operations. These procedures incorporated lessons learned from centuries of individual cannibalistic practices, scaling up techniques that had been developed for single victims to handle the systematic processing of entire populations. The timing of harvesting operations was carefully planned to coincide with peak enhancement value for different categories of human livestock. Young subjects were processed at ages when their vitality was considered maximum, while older subjects might be maintained longer to allow their wisdom or experience to mature. The scheduling systems developed to manage these operations required complex calculations, balancing current needs against future potential, creating optimization problems that challenged even the most sophisticated royal administrators. The processing facilities developed to handle human livestock represented the pinnacle of cannibalistic technology, incorporating innovations that wouldn't be matched in conventional food processing for centuries. These facilities could handle every aspect of human processing, from initial slaughter through final preparation for consumption, maintaining quality standards that satisfied even the most demanding royal palates, while achieving throughput levels that could supply entire courts with their cannibalistic needs. The waste management systems developed for these operations addressed the practical challenges of disposing of unusable human materials without creating evidence that might expose the scope of royal cannibalistic practices. Specialized furnaces were designed to completely incinerate bones and other materials that couldn't be consumed or otherwise utilized. Acid baths were developed to dissolve organic materials that might otherwise create disposal problems. Even the ash and residue from these processes were managed through systems that could scatter them over wide areas without creating detectable concentrations that might raise questions. The economic implications of large-scale human livestock operations required fundamental restructuring of royal finances and resource allocation. These operations consumed enormous amounts of capital for facility construction, staff salaries, and operational expenses, requiring budget categories that couldn't be openly acknowledged in normal financial records. Royal courts developed parallel accounting systems that could track these expenses while maintaining the appearance of conventional royal expenditures. The labor requirements for human livestock operations created employment opportunities for individuals whose skills and psychological profiles made them unsuitable for normal occupations. These facilities needed staff members who could perform duties that would traumatize ordinary workers. requiring recruitment from populations that had already demonstrated their capacity for extreme violence or moral flexibility. The employment practices developed for these positions included psychological screening procedures designed to identify individuals who could function effectively in environments that would break most people. The security measures required to protect human livestock operations from discovery or infiltration represented some of the most sophisticated defensive systems ever developed by royal courts. These facilities were protected by multiple layers of physical barriers, electronic surveillance systems, and human guards who were themselves kept under constant observation to prevent betrayal. The security protocols included procedures for handling various threat scenarios, from individual escape attempts to organized rescue operations mounted by hostile forces. The intelligence networks developed to support human livestock operations extended far beyond the immediate needs of facility security, creating comprehensive information gathering systems that could monitor potential threats throughout entire kingdoms and beyond. These networks included agents embedded in religious institutions, merchant organizations, and even rival royal courts, providing early warning of any activities that might threaten the secrecy of cannibalistic operations. The counterintelligence measures implemented to protect these operations from discovery included disinformation campaigns designed to discredit any accurate reports that might emerge about royal cannibalistic practices. These campaigns could quickly mobilize resources to portray whistleblowers as delusional, create alternative explanations for suspicious evidence, and redirect investigations toward false leads that would waste the resources of potential investigators while protecting the true scope of royal cannibalism. The research and development programs associated with human livestock operations pushed the boundaries of medical and scientific knowledge in directions that conventional scholars couldn't even imagine. Royal courts established experimental facilities where new techniques for enhancing human consumption value could be tested and refined. These facilities combined elements of medical research, agricultural science, and psychological experimentation in ways that produced innovations that were simultaneously brilliant and horrifying. The experimental subjects used in these research programs included both volunteers from human livestock populations and captured individuals whose disappearances wouldn't trigger investigations. The research protocols developed for these experiments showed the same attention to scientific methodology that characterized legitimate medical research, but applied to objectives that no ethical researcher would ever pursue. The results of these experiments were documented in scientific journals that were kept secret from conventional academic institutions, creating parallel bodies of knowledge that existed entirely outside normal scholarly discourse. The technological innovations that emerged from cannibalistic research programs included developments in preservation techniques, enhancement procedures, and consumption methods that represented genuine advances in their respective fields. Some of these innovations found applications in conventional medicine and food processing, though their origins in cannibalistic research were carefully concealed from the practitioners who benefited from them. The philosophical implications of systematic royal cannibalism extended far beyond the immediate moral questions raised by human consumption itself. These practices represented fundamental challenges to every assumption about human nature, social organization, and the relationship between power and responsibility. Royal courts that engaged in systematic cannibalism had to develop entire philosophical frameworks that could justify their practices while maintaining their sense of moral superiority over their subjects. The theological challenges posed by systematic cannibalism required innovative interpretations of religious doctrine that could accommodate practices that seemed to contradict every principle of conventional morality. Court theologians developed elaborate arguments that portrayed human consumption as divinely sanctioned, creating religious frameworks that could transform acts of cannibalism into expressions of spiritual devotion. These theological innovations influenced religious development throughout Europe, introducing concepts that affected religious thinking in ways that extended far beyond their original cannibalistic contexts. The legal systems that developed to govern systematic cannibalism created parallel judicial frameworks that existed entirely outside conventional legal structures. These systems included courts that could adjudicate disputes related to human livestock, enforcement mechanisms that could protect cannibalistic operations from interference, and legal precedents that could guide decision-making in situations that conventional law couldn't address. The social implications of systematic royal cannibalism created hierarchical structures that extended the dehumanization inherent in these practices throughout entire societies. Royal courts that practiced systematic cannibalism influenced social attitudes in ways that normalized violence, reduced empathy, and created populations that could accept levels of cruelty that would have been unthinkable under different circumstances. The cultural impact of these practices influenced artistic expression, literary development, and intellectual discourse in ways that shaped European civilization for centuries. The psychological effects of living in societies where systematic cannibalism was practiced by ruling elites created cultural attitudes that influenced everything from child-rearing practices to concepts of justice and human dignity.